Hello everyone, my name is Alexana Light. I am a middle grades education major and my two concentration areas are English language arts and science. So for my final project, I chose to teach my mini lesson based off of the lesson plan and the Google Slides that I had already created for this class. So I am going to be teaching you guys my anticipatory set since that was a very large part of the lesson plan that I created. The lesson plan I created was based off of a 6th grade English language arts standard from Common Core that wanted students to be able to compare and contrast the experiences of listening to versus reading a text. And in order to have students meet that standard, I included in my lesson plan that they would listen to and read chapter 3 of The Giver by Lois Lowry and then complete a Venn diagram in order to fully understand and be able to visually see the differences in the two experiences. So without further ado, I am going to get into my mini lesson for you guys. I hope you enjoy it. Good afternoon, class. So for today's lesson, we are going to be doing a review of figurative language and some elements of style, and then incorporating that into an activity that involves chapter 3 of The Giver by Lois Lowry. So to start off with, can anybody tell me any examples of figurative language that we may or may not have discussed previously in this class? Okay, good. I'm hearing some different types like similes, onomatopoeias, hyperboles. Good. Those are all great examples of types of figurative language and are all ones that we have reviewed before in class. So kudos to you guys for remembering those. So to start off with, we are going to be talking about personification. And personification is giving human-like qualities to something that is not human. Now, this could be anything depending on the context of what you're writing. It could be animals, it could be aliens, plants, or inanimate objects. Anything that you want, really. So, an example of personification would be if you were writing a piece about going and walking your dog, and you said that your dog spoke to you. Because speaking is considered to be a human-like quality, having your dog, a non-human, speak to you is considered a form of personification. So the next type of figurative language that we're going to be talking about is onomatopoeias. Now, can anybody tell me what an onomatopoeia is or give me an example of an onomatopoeia? Good, I'm hearing a lot of you guys say things like boom, pop, fizz, buzz, whoosh, things like that. So those are all great examples of onomatopoeias because an onomatopoeia is a word that is also a sound. So like a buzz is a sound, but it's also the physical word. So those are all great examples of onomatopoeias and could be incorporated into writing such as she heard the buzz of a fly as it zoomed past her, where buzz would be considered the onomatopoeia. Another type of figurative language that we have previously discussed in our class is hyperboles. Now, hyperboles are are exaggerations that are incorporated into your writing. So it could be something like on the slide it says, "I am so hungry I could eat a horse." The exaggeration comes from, even though you may be extremely hungry, you wouldn't necessarily eat a horse because that's a lot for one person to eat. So, our next form of figurative language that we're going to talk about is alliteration. Now, a lot of people tend to get alliteration confused with tongue twisters, but that is because a lot of tongue twisters that we come up with use alliteration as the main form of figurative language in the tongue twister. For example, baby bumblebees bathing in a bubble bath is a tongue twister, but it's also a form of alliteration because by definition, alliteration is the repetition of a single sound or letter at the beginning of each word. And in the example that I just gave you, the alliteration comes from the repeated use of the B's at the beginning of the majority of the words in that sentence. Alright, now the last two types of figurative language that we are going to be reviewing are similes and metaphors. And the reason why I saved these two for last is because a lot of people tend to confuse the two of them, since they both, by definition, are comparing two or more things. However, there is a very distinct difference between the two. So a simile, while it is a comparison of two different things, it utilizes the words like or as in the comparison. So the example that is listed on the slide in that little diagram that I put up there is, the room is as hot as an oven. It's considered a simile and not a metaphor because it says as hot as, so the use of as makes it a simile. Now, metaphors, on the other hand, are still comparisons, but they don't use like or as. And the example, again, listed on the PowerPoint is, the room is an oven. So it's still comparing the temperature of the room with an oven, but without using the words like or as. Of course, there are still several other types of figurative language, and there are many more that we have previously talked about in this class, but those are some of the main ones that I wanted to review with you guys. Now, on to our review of style. Can anybody give me a definition of what style is? Good. So it is the writer's specific way of writing their piece. And it typically is individualized by each writer. However, there are certain categories of styles that may be utilized by multiple writers. And there are several different things that make up style and that can indicate a certain type of style, such as the diction, the tone, the mood, or imagery that is present within the writing. These are all very important elements to consider, especially in the activity that we have coming up. Now, diction is defined as being the choice of words that is used. So in a piece of writing, if you were saying that she ran as fast as she could, you could improve the diction or alter the diction by taking that sentence and saying she sprinted as fast as she could instead of ran, because the two words ran and sprint, often sprinted, they can have different connotation or denotation, which are both things that we have previously discussed in this class as well. Tone is how the author sounds in the writing and how the author sounds about what they are writing. Versus, this is very often confused with mood, because mood is how the reader feels. So sometimes there can be a correlation between the two, where the tone and the mood are very similar versus, so for example, if the tone is very angry and the author feels very mad about whatever the topic is that they're writing about, that could create a very angry mood that the reader feels. However, that's not always the case. The author may feel a certain way that may differ from what the reader feels. So it all is based off of bias and personal perception. Now, can anybody remind me of our definition of imagery that we use in this class? All right, good. Imagery is the representation of all five senses, or any of the five senses in writing. It could, a lot of times people consider it to be just visual imagery, when it could also be auditory, or it could be touch kinesthetic imagery. However, typically the two main types that you see are visual and auditory. Now, just like with figurative language, there are several other things that make up style and several other aspects of style that you should be considerate of, but those are just a few of the main ones that I want you guys to focus on as we transition into the lesson specific to our activity today, and then begin to work on the activity in itself. Okay, so that was my anticipatory set, and that was the lesson that I presented to you guys. To finish out my lesson plan, I would teach my students about the differences between reading and listening to a text and talking with them about bias and how that can influence the experience that you may have while you read certain story. And then after I presented this information to the students and had a discussion with them about it, I would have them read Chapter 3 of The Giver by Lois Lowry on their own, and I'd probably give them about 10 to 15 minutes for that. And while they were reading, I would encourage them to write down any thoughts that they had or anything that they noticed about that specific chapter while they were reading, with a lot of emphasis on the elements of figurative language and style that we had just discussed. And then after they had read the chapter, I would go back and play a YouTube clip that I found of somebody else reading the chapter and have the students repeat that process of listening to the chapter and then writing down notes as they notice certain things about that given chapter. And then after students have both read and listened to the chapter being read aloud, I would give them all a Venn diagram worksheet to fill out, which would count as the student individual activity or individual practice for the lesson. And they would complete the Venn diagram, and at the end, to wrap up the lesson, I would have them discuss things that they noticed were similar or were different about the two experiences of reading and listening to Chapter 3 of The Giver by Lois Lowry. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys all have a great day. Bye.